Okay, so good morning, everybody. So this is actually class 18 of Touching a City Soul, and it's class 3 of the review of the Maimer of the 7th of Shvat, which is based on this pasuk of trust in Hashem and do good, dwell in the land and be nourished by your faith. So that's the pasuk that we've been talking about. That's the, as we said, my maamarim are usually based on either a verse from Torah or on a quote from the Gemara or in the Medrash or something like that. This is our verse. So basically, what we've been talking mainly about is the breakup of these words and be nourished by your faith. What does being nourished by your faith mean? And we've talked about the necessity of bringing faith, which is a transcendent soul power, into ourselves in a practical way as we eat food, and then we're nourished by our food, that we take food that's outside of us and bring it into us. So we're being nourished by our faith. And that I'm just going to, briefly put the highlights from the different sections of the Maimer. We're not, because we've already done this part of the review. So we've said that for Emunah to pervade all of our faculties, one needs to nourish it, right? Otherwise it stays outside of us and surrounds us and is an encompassing thing, faith, but in order for it to actually impact us in a practical way, we need to nourish it. We do this through the service of Torah mitzvos with spiritual exertion, working to reveal the power of the souls, and with physical exertion, weakening the physical grip of the body so it won't obscure godliness. What are we trying to do by the spiritual exertion and physical exertion? We're trying to conceptualize, understand, and bond with a godly concept until it can actually be felt and sensed. That's the entire Maimer has really been talking about how to do this, right? And what the mechanics are of trying to conceptualize, understand, and bond with godliness, a godly concept until it can be felt and sensed. And that is the process of nourishing faith, because once we've done that, we sort of permeate ourselves with this godly concept, and then it changes us on a practical level. So this is sort of the roadmap for the Maimer. Then we said that Moshe Rabbeinu is called a faithful shepherd and a shepherd of faith because he nourishes the Jewish people with faith. He helps us to nourish ourselves with faith, which is what we're trying to do. Moshe Rabbeinu is the leader who can help us to do that. And it talks about why and how and the level that he was on. Then it talks about the idea of the two levels of the souls in the Jewish people that are called the seed of man and the seed of animal, as Yirmiyahu talks about them, and that these two levels of the Jewish people, one has a more natural introspective consciousness of godliness, and one does not have that natural introspectiveness of godliness, called das. And the definition of das in the Maimer is a conscious awareness when intellectual and understanding become attached and fixed within the soul, as if one actually sees and feels godliness. And that process is also called nurturing faith, right? The das is what helps us to nurture our faith. So that's what we're aiming at. We're aiming at developing our das. That's what we're aiming at. And then it shows how not everybody has that ability naturally, and we have to work at it to different degrees. We all have that capacity naturally. We all have that potential naturally, and we have different levels of actualization depending on the level of the soul, and we all can work more and achieve it, whether completely or in part or sometimes or whatever it is, but we can achieve it. And then it explains different psukim in the Torah that support this idea. He compares this idea of the conscious awareness as something that brings about a real impact to the person versus a mere intellectual understanding without this sensing of the godliness of the intellectual idea doesn't have as lasting an effect on a person. A person can understand something intellectually, but it doesn't necessarily impact their life. And we talked about that ethics professor in Oxford who understood ethics but didn't behave ethically, right? And he compared himself to the mathematics professor who understood math, but he wasn't a triangle, right? So we're not trying to do that with our Torah learning. We're trying to have our Torah learning impact us. And then we talked about this idea that What another term for this is histaklos, which means to gaze into something intently, and that strengthens one's emunah. Right, we're gazing into, we're trying to see the depth of something, and seeing the depth of something, which is godliness. So we're trying to sense the godliness in something. That's what strengthens our emunah and brings it into us. We attach ourselves, we connect to this deeper reality of this Torah idea or the davening that we're doing or whatever it is, and we sense the godliness in it. That brings it into us, and this is called the food of faith that strengthens our emunah, like physical food, which binds our body and soul. When one senses the holiness of Torah and the divine concepts expressed in davening, it bonds and binds our emunah to us. Then at the end of last class, we did this rather quickly, but we went through the 2 paragraphs of Shema. So I'm going to maybe go through this a little bit more detailed, since it was rather quick at the end of last class. Gives an example about the 2 paragraphs of Shema, each of them being a representation of a different level of service of Hashem, of the Jewish people who are at different levels, serving Hashem at different levels. And obviously, it's a service of Hashem either way. We're not, right? They're both in the Torah, they're both considered to be paragraphs of Shema. And the previous Rebbe is explaining this idea of the Shema as a way of also helping us understand this difference. So the first paragraph of Shema, it says, reflects a time when the Jews are carrying out God's will. And the verse is, you shall love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. And the word ma'od is the same letters as Adam, which reflects that higher level of consciousness that's the seed of man. And they do Hashem's will with a ratzah, a running to Hashem's will, and with a desire for Hashem's will. And that brings an emanation of Hashem's ratzah back to them, which also those letters can be rearranged for tzinor, which means a pipeline that, it becomes a pipeline, a direct line up and back between them and Hashem. And they perceive the world to be different. They perceive the world at a deeper vibration almost, right? They see the godliness, they perceive the godliness that's in the world. And again, this is like, I just quoted this from the Maimer because I think it's my favorite line from the Maimer. For them, the world is a bright place because they see the inner core of everything, its true essential being. I asked everybody to think about what is their part of the Maimer that struck them. I think this line, spoils alert, that's what I will share when we get to that part. This is the line that really, it's affected me deeply. That this is what the previous Rebbe says. They'll see the world as a bright place. Certainly, we are in need of those glasses right now. And then the second paragraph of Shema reflects a time when the Jews are not carrying out God's will. Again, it's not completely that they're not doing it, but it's not at that level. And they are doing mitzvahs and they're also sinning, right? So that second paragraph of Shema talks about reward and punishment on a physical level. But the wording as it relates to the Maimer is the words reflect bina, listening, understand, under an intellectual understanding. And it says you should love God with all your heart and with all your soul, but it does not include all your might, which are the letters that are rearranged to Adam, because we're talking about the service that's the level of the seed of animal versus the seed of man. Again, we're talking about godly souls, we're talking about people's souls, but it's being compared to the seed of man or the seed of animal, which just means a higher level or a lower level of service. It's not a literal animal, right? We're still talking about people and godly souls and their service of God. It's a true service of God. It's just a service of God that could have some sinning involved in it. It's not, it's not that highest level. And so therefore there's repercussions to different kinds of repercussions that happen. And it's not called with all your might, it's called with your heart and your soul. So that's pretty high level. We're not talking about nothing here, but it doesn't include with all your might. It's not the level of the seed of man. That's kind of where we've gone until now. That's a review of the review. So how are people doing? Okay. Okay, so this is the new part of the review, this last section, which is section 6. It's the last section of the mimer, and it's the last page of the review. And we'll go over this in Rit Hashem now, and then we'll see if we have time for the sharing part at the end of the class. We'll see how long this takes. So this last section, section 6, which again, I'm just subtitling it, bringing it all together. Das, Moshe Rabbeinu, trust, and the conclusion. Right? We're going usually the last end of the last section of the mimer. It does add something, and then it also serves as a tying everything together. So there's another definition of das here, like another like a more refined or specific definition of das, or another example that helps us understand it. So chachma, seeing, and bina, hearing, come together. That's what we're trying to accomplish. What we've been trying to accomplish this whole time is that, is that bringing together of the seeing and the hearing in the deep looking, right? In the histalkos, we're trying to look deeply into something. It means we're seeing and we're understanding. It's a combination of the two. And we always base the concept in Chassidus and Kabbalah. We're basing a concept in something in Torah. It's not being pulled out of thin air, but we're taking a verse in Torah and we're defining it on a deeper level. We're defining the terminology in a more sort of esoteric level. So the verse, and Adam knew Chava, which refers to the fact that Adam and Chava got married, and knew is a sort of a word that's used in Torah to connote the intimate relationship. So Adam knew Chava means that they were intimate. Adam represents the idea of Chachma, because man is the concept of Chachma, like that's a male attribute. Seeing is a male attribute. It's a right side of the spheroids. The men are the right side. The masculine energy is the right side of the spheros. Chava means bina. Bina is a feminine attribute. The feminine energy of the world is the left side of the spheroids. And nu, this concept of the connection, is das. That's the center vector of the spheros, and the center vector of the spheros is that male and female energy coming together and working together, which is represented in the physical world, with this idea of intimacy, right? Where you literally have the male energy and the female energy coming together. And then a child is born, and the child, we're going to talk about, like, that union produces das. The female and male energy coming together produces another energy, which is the combination energy, the bonding of Chachma and Bina through das. In Avodah, what does this mean in our spiritual service of Hashem? This means connecting to Hashem with the deepest point of the heart through Bina with contemplation. It's not just an intellectual contemplation alone. It's not only emotions, it's a combination, right? There's the Chachma and the Bina coming together. It's the understanding of the heart, which is different than just the understanding of the mind. It's a deep point of understanding in the heart. One needs to arouse the will of the heart to bond with the concepts he is contemplating to the extent that he feels it with his senses. That's what we're trying to accomplish, right? Just that. Once we get that done, we're good to go. So like maybe we'll do that over lunch today, right? Like, we'll just, well, kind of simple. It's just simple, why don't we just do it and then that's it. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. There's an intellectual contemplation, and there's a deeper, the understanding of the heart in Chassidus is explained to be a deeper understanding than the understanding of the head. But in order to actualize it, you got to do a lot of work first. You've got to get the understanding of the head involved, and then you've got to sense the godliness, and all this other stuff, right? We're trying to connect to Hashem with the deepest point of the heart through Bina. That's Bina. You take the male energy and you apply the female energy to it, and you combine it together and that arouses the will of the heart to bond with the concepts he's contemplating to the extent that he feels it with his senses. That's the definition of das, right? Now, it sounds familiar, like, oh, that's, oh, right, that's das, because when Adam and Chava come together, that's das. When Chachma and Bina come together, they give birth to das. Now, there's another level, which is the higher das. We talked about this when we did the mimer. There's a higher das and a lower das. The higher das is really another way of saying keser, which is when contemplating and perception come together, there's a higher like energy almost that brings Chachma and Bina together so that they can, Chachma can basically inseminate Bina and Bina can grow. Like that is the process of like the higher level, bringing them together. What happens from the lower level of das, when das is produced, the lower das connects the intellect to the emotions. That's downward. Chachma and Bina coming together on the higher level is like this idea of arousing the will of the heart to bond with the concepts he's contemplating. And then when das is like given birth to with Chachma and Bina, the next thing that das does is connect the intellect to the emotions. In other words, it gives birth to love of God, fear of God, mercy on the soul and on other people. All of those are the three main emotions. So there's the part that is more the intellectual, but not just mind intellectual, but heart contemplation aspect, which is like the higher level. And then there's the giving birth to the emotions, the love and awe of God and mercy on the soul and mercy on others. That's what it produces, like what it gives birth to. So it's like when a person learns this concept and they really connect to the concept and they sense the godliness in it, and then that results in their feeling, closer to God and feeling awe of God, and then actually changing their actions and behaving differently, because what happens is the emotions, there's the emotions of love and awe and mercy, and then that gives birth to action. When a person understands and senses the godliness and starts to feel, their emotions start to get involved, and then their actions follow. So that's how das connects to the emotions. Das connects the intellect to the emotions, and that it's sort of like the neck of the person's body connects the head and the heart, and you want to make sure that there's a straight path here, so that the energy of the brain can connect to the body, yeah, that's the idea in short. So those are, we discussed it when we did the mimer, but even in the review, it's quite complex.
Robertson, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
So there's an implication that higher, obviously Kesser is the ultimate, but the lower isn't as low as the word low kind of connotates. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So it's just a poor translation of Das Elyon and Das Tachton. It doesn't, it doesn't mean something on a low level at all.
Okay. Because even Tachton is kind of low.
Yeah, but it's not.
It's not the intention.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you have to know the context, what you're talking about. You're talking about supernal worlds altogether. So.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
Chaya, how would you describe the will of the heart?
So
how do you separate that from emotions, dipping into the emotions?
That's a really good question. So the way that I understand it, which is obviously not, the highest level that a person can understand, is that when we're talking about an understanding heart, we're talking about the wisdom of the heart versus emotions. So it's the inner dimension of the heart. It's it's interesting, like when it's like, for example, what made King Solomon HaMelech so unusual was that he was called the wisest of all men because he was chachmas lev. He had chachmas lev. He had an understanding heart. So there's a wisdom in the heart, which is actually like it's in the heart, so it's like under the head, but its source is in Keser versus Chachma. Its source is higher than Chachma. So it's not quote unquote only emotion, right? It's not even considered to be necessarily emotion. It's the wisdom of the heart, which is the inner dimension of Bina. And like when we say in Erev Shabbos, Bina, Liba, Uva, Halev, Maven in Pesach Eliyahu and the Erev Shabbos davening, it's like the understanding. It's the quote from the Zohar, right? The Zohar is where we get these ideas from, like, and the first sefer, let's say, to write this down that I know of. It's like that wisdom of the heart and the understanding of the heart. Maybe a little bit true intuition that a person might have. It's like a combination of understanding, intuition, sensing. There's like something going on that's not just one dimensional. It's like a real inner wisdom. It's not emotion yet.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Anything else before
I
we
have
go on?
Yeah, I have a question. When you see an action, it could be the action of any person. It can be come from their intellect without the combination, or it could be the combination. You don't know, like the action, you can't like tell, correct, what combination of what you're talking about is actually coming down. Is that, so even within yourself, it's so hard to tell. Do you know what I'm saying?
So
where it's coming from.
A person's, let me try to rephrase what I think you're saying, see if I understand it. A person can do an action without having the feeling behind it. Is that what you're saying?
A feeling, but it can be a combination of everything. Without having a feeling, without having understanding.
Yes.
They can almost
Correct.
have dot without even understanding. It's almost, if you have dot, the minute you think about it, you don't have it anymore.
Yeah, so yes, a person's actions can be without emotion and without understanding. And in fact, that is how we are supposed to train ourselves, meaning when we were given the Torah, we said, Nasa v'nishma. We will do, and then we'll understand. When we train a child, right? You train a child to start brushing their teeth before they have any emotional connection to the idea of having fresh breath, and before they understand that brushing their teeth is going to help them not have cavities and have oral surgery when they get older, right? Because when they're 2 years old and you're teaching them to brush their teeth, they don't understand that, they can't understand that. And even if you try to explain it to them, that's not going to influence them at any level to do it. You just train them in good habits. And as they get older, they understand and they get a deeper awareness and a deeper connection to what they're doing. So chinuch, right, educating our children and ourselves has everything to do with training proper behaviors and proper behaviors, let's say, actions, and working with ourselves and with our children and with others to catch our intellect and emotions up with our well-trained actions, right? You have to work from the inside and the outside at the same time and meet someplace in the middle. If we waited to do a proper action until we understood it properly, who knows how old we would be before we behaved ethically, morally, nicely to other people, brushed our teeth, washed our clothing and everything else, right? We can't wait till we completely understand something to do it when we know it's the right thing to do. or we can't wait till we completely have an emotion connected to like what we want to do it before we do it. But maybe we don't want to brush our teeth. We just don't want to brush our teeth. It's annoying, right? Like we just don't want to do it. But we know that that's what we're supposed to do. We were trained to do it, and we do it even if we don't want to do it, because we know, we trust our parents that this is important. And then as we get older, we understand why it's important. And then maybe we even want to brush our teeth, you know, because we had a cavity filled and we don't want to have to go back to the dentist. So we realize brushing our teeth will help us not have to go back to the dentist. And we even want to brush our teeth, you know? So for sure, not only is it true that we can't do actions without understanding and feeling for them, we even need to do that. What I believe the previous Rebbe is trying to help us understand here is that let's try, when we can, to also sense the godliness in something. It will deepen our experience of the action, and it will deepen our experience of the connection to godliness. Because, you know, when we do something that our parents, let's say, train us to do, when we understand why, we understand how meaningful it is to them, and we appreciate how they were trying to help us all these years, it also deepens our relationship to our parents when we're doing it. It doesn't only, we aren't only happy just to do it. It brings to the mind the whole relationship that we were in, you know, the person who asked us to do it or something like that. So it's like, you know, it's like the miracle of, again, everything, you know, bring back to a physical parable. It's like the miracle of Chizkiyahu's tunnels. When Jerusalem was under siege and Chizkiyahu had to find a water source to bring into Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim doesn't have any natural water source, but when they were under siege and they needed to bring, the way that they could survive is if they brought, right, nothing can survive without water. So if they're going to be under siege and they're not going to have water source, so he had this idea, this brilliant idea that, you know, kept them going, was to have underground tunnels to bring water into Yerushalayim. Everybody goes to Yerushalayim and has a tour, goes on the tunnel tours, not the tunnel tours now, what's the tunnel tours of underneath the Kosel, but the water tunnel tours, right? People put on boots and they walk through Chizkiyahu's tunnels and whatever, anyway. So that was a miracle. What was the miracle? They had very little time before the army got there. So they had to dig from outside of Yerushalayim, from the water source, and from inside the city at the same time, or they wouldn't have time to complete the tunnel. Now, imagine, this is before, you know, radar, sonar, you know, all this equipment. Imagine you're digging, I don't know how many miles it is. I don't know what the dimensions are, but even if it's, you know, 5 feet, right? Like imagine trying to dig from inside out and from outside in and expecting to meet in the middle to make this tunnel. If they're off by a fraction of an inch, they're going to be building 2 tunnels, right? And they met in the middle and they were able to get the water into Yerushalayim. So to me, that's a very powerful visual aid of this idea of, right, we're like trying to meet in the middle. We work on ourselves from the inside out, work ourselves from the outside in, and we're trying to meet in the middle somehow to like open that connection and that pipeline. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. The reason I ask it is because my daughter and myself last night on the phone, kind of late, we were talking about what, you know, I just kashered my kitchen. So and she had kashered her kitchen years ago. So we started talking about why did we do that? And neither of us could actually answer.
Very normal.
So that's actually why I'm asking this question. And with the tunnel, at any point in the digging, you had no idea what you're doing.
Right. Well, you don't know why you did it. You did. I'll tell you why you did it. You did it because you have an neshama. You have an neshama. That's why you did it.
Okay.
And your neshama tapped you on the shoulder and said, tap, 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 tap. I want you to only eat kosher food. And you heard it. Why did you hear it now and not 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
Well, you know, I'm an old woman, you know.
Not old enough.
You know what I mean?
Okay, who knows? Maybe there's a certain something got a little clearer in you between your body and your soul, and you heard your soul calling you and you did it. Maybe all the extra learning that you're doing, maybe you did a mitzvah, maybe who knows what, but tap, 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 tap. Maybe a relative who's passed away has been working on you for a while, and finally, there's so many reasons, but it's definitely your neshama. You heard your neshama, so good for you.
Kol hakavod, Carolyn, you're inspiring me. That gives me inspiration. Thank you for sharing that. I'm old too. I just want to say also that when you use the brushing teeth example, it's interesting. So kids trust their parents, and it's a way to build bitachon. Now I'm thinking the way you described it, because when you do it and you don't quite know why you're doing it, you're building bitachon also in that process.
Interesting.
So, right?
That's an interesting insight. You're flexing those muscles, so without even knowing that you're flexing those muscles. You're flexing those bitachon muscles. You're creating a connect. Every time a person does a mitzvah, they're connecting to God, and every time they connect to God, it's easier to connect to God. And every time it's easier to connect to God, it's easier to do the next mitzvah and to understand the next thing that you learn and everything else. It's a positive, what's the word? Positive, like cycle.
Feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting though, because I was thinking about Carolyn's question too. Like, do I do it before, even though I don't quite understand it, but the way you're describing it and the examples you're giving are very, very helpful for action. But when you were saying it, I was thinking, like, we say to our kids, just trust me on this. Whether you want, just brush your teeth, trust me on this one, or whatever it is. But in the same way you're teaching us now, like, trust Hashem that the Torah is emet, and keep that. So that's like, yes, an exercise, a weightlifting routine for bitachon, in a sense, coming from a different angle.
Right, and that's what we, at the beginning of this review, or the beginning of the mimer, right? We said, trust in Hashem is an action, and do good. It's an instruction. It refers to bitachon. It's an action. That's what we're going to do that in the end also. That like what you're saying, trust is an action. There's another way of explaining it, right? Trust isn't just like in your mind. It's like, oh, I trust you, so I'm going to follow that instruction. Yeah. Okay. And anything else? Okay, so let's continue. So Moshe Rabbeinu was able, so this is like a pretty major point that's being brought here, right? We talked about Moshe before, we talked about Das, we talked about all these things. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to draw down Das to the Jewish people, even to the seeds of animal souls. This goes back to Taya's question from 2 weeks ago, right? And every soul can access this at some level. Don't have to be a seed of man, even though most of us are seeds of animal in this generation, he says, right? But like Moshe Rabbeinu can help everybody access their das. This enables the Jews to have awareness of God. He is the Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd, the shepherd of faith. He nourishes and sustains the Jews with faith continuously, not just the generation that he was in, but he gave us the Torah. The Torah is what helps us do this, right? So Moshe is able to help even the people who are the seeds of animal to access this level of their soul. Because of that, he's called the first Redeemer and the final Redeemer, because he endows the Jewish people with das. We're going to see, because the definition of redemption is going to be an activated das, as we're going to see in a few minutes. So he's called the first Redeemer and the final Redeemer. He was literally the first Redeemer because he took us out of Mitzrayim. He's not literally the final Redeemer, Mashiach will be, but he set in motion the final redemption. And he helps us to be finally redeemed, I guess you could say almost. Okay, so Moshe and Das, as we see, first it said of the Jews and the people believed, and then Moshe instructed, and you shall know that I am God, meaning first they had emunah, which is that surrounding, encompassing soul power. But then after Moshe got involved, he said, you shall know, right? I could like, first there was a belief and then it became a knowledge, which is the das, which is what we've been talking about, right? Like they activated their emunah to the point where it became das. They were able to be fed their emunah to the point where it became internalized, and they knew. About the times of Mashiach, it says, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, and everyone will know me, right? It's not just going to be the surrounding level of like take it on faith kind of thing. It's going to be a permeating level where there's a certain knowledge, there's a certain das, that's sensing of godliness. So that's what we're coming to at the times of Mashiach, not just the people that Moshe impacted, but the earth will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. Everyone will know me, right? It's going to be a global experience of this activation of the sensing of godliness. The first and final redemption, the first redemption, the das was drawn down at a level called Mimale Kol Almin, the level of godliness that permeates each aspect of creation according to its vessel. That's a level of godliness that is housed in the world. And the final redemption, the das will be able to be drawn down from the level of Soviv Kol Almin, the transcendent aspects of godly light. So besides the fact that Moshe was able to impact the Jewish people this way, and in the times of Mashiach, the entire world would be impacted in this way. In addition, the level that was drawn down at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu was a lower level of godliness, and the level of godliness that will be drawn down when Mashiach comes will be a higher level of godliness. So there's the sort of the quantity and the quality that's going to be different with the final redemption, but it's the same structure of what's happening, which is why Moshe is called the first redeemer and the final redeemer, right? Because redemption, the sort of the definition of redemption is being able to peel away all the outer layers that hide godliness and relate to and connect with God in an open way. So Moshe taught us how to do this by activating our das and to sense the godliness. And he enabled us to do it, even the seeds of animal level of the souls. And Mashiach will enable the whole world to do it. Moshe did it at one level of godliness. Mashiach will do it at another level of godliness. How was this done? I mean, the Rebbe doesn't speak about this in this mimer, but that's like the giving of the Torah, right? Where it says, it's in this week's parsha. That pasuk is in this week's parsha. Ata hareis ladas ki Hashem hu Elokim. You started to show that Hashem is God. That refers to the giving of the Torah, and it's the first step towards Mashiach is when the Torah is given in the world. Or the next step, creation maybe was the first step, but it was the next step where godliness was revealed in the world at the giving of the Torah and will be even more revealed with the coming of Mashiach. How are we doing? Okay, and then now is like the conclusion. This is back to our opening pasuk, trust in Hashem and do good, dwell in the land and be nourished by your faith, right? That's the pasuk that we've been explaining. Trust in God, this is the first thing that's necessary. Like he said something, we trust him, like Talia was saying about the parents, do good, this trust must be expressed in action. Brush your teeth. Your parents say, brush your teeth, brush your teeth. Like, okay, that's trusting in God, right? Like, then dwell in the land. You'll have a life of tranquility. That's I think what the previous was saying about these people have for them, the world is a beautiful place. And be nourished by your faith. What is that? The food of faith is a person's das. It attaches a person to their thoughts and brings it close to him, meaning their thoughts, their understanding, they connect to it. They connect to this trust, right? It becomes part of them, so that their actions are something that they see the inner meaning of, or they sense the inner meaning of God, they sense the inner presence of God or whatever in those actions or in the world. Conclusion. The Rebbe says, all Jews naturally love Torah mitzvahs. It's a natural state of the Jew. Like Carol was saying, why did you do this? Well, because you love Torah mitzvahs. They're happy to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. Every Jew is happy to learn Torah and to do mitzvahs. despise sin, and are God-fearing. I mean, the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe, starting from the Alter Rebbe, even from the Baal Shem Tov, even from Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Like, devoted their entire life to this truth. If you introduce a Jew to his soul, teach him Torah, show him mitzvahs, he's going to do them. I mean, look at the world. That's what the Rebbe's message was to the world. That's what, right? However, this can be on an intellectual level, and it needs to be brought into an awareness of holiness and a closeness to the person. We don't want to just like understand it. We want it to be something that the person connects to and makes it personal. Another definition of das is personalization, taking something personally. We're always told, don't take it personally. Well, here we want to take it personally. Das does this for a person. That's what helps the person take it personally. That's why it's called the food of faith. It makes our emunah personal. And Moshe Rabbeinu helps us to accomplish that. I added that in parentheses. Everything in parentheses I think is my own. I added, Moshe helps us to accomplish that because he's the one who gave us the Torah and everything else. So that is chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek, can I tell you? That is the conclusion of the review.
Chaya, can we talk a little bit more person's das? Because that's like the gist of what this is all about. I mean, to trust is almost easier. I mean, yeah, to trust, but to be nourished by your faith, a person's das, still not on a very practical level for me, understanding a person's das. I know we talked about it, but
well, here in the very beginning of the Maimer, I think this is what the Rebbe is saying: work to reveal the powers of the soul and weaken the physical grip of the body, so it won't obscure godliness. What does that mean? And what are you trying to do by doing that? Conceptualize, understand, and bond with a godly concept until it can actually be felt and sensed. I would, this is the, it's in the mimer, usually the whole point of the mimer is right at the beginning, but we don't really understand what it's saying at the beginning. And then the mimer unpacks it more and more and more and more detail. This is the roadmap of the mimer, that's how we sort of develop our das, I guess, by working to reveal the soul powers, working on our intellect by, trying to understand godly ideas, working on our emotions to try to refine them, trying to not get too involved, too overwhelmed by the physical, trying to notice the godliness in the physical and bond with these ideas that we learned as much as we can. Though that is, I would say, of course, I'm partial to, this whole idea, but I'm saying I would say learning Chassidus is what enables us to do this, because Chassidus is that combination of intellectual understanding that talks to the heart. It doesn't just talk to the mind. It demands a person's heart to get involved. So I think that learning Chassidus is what helps a person to develop their das on a very practical level, where the Rebbe demands action all the time. In anything the Rebbe says it demands action, right? And also understanding, and also truth, and also, all these things. Like I think that's what feeds our das. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So I don't know if people want to share, we have about 10 more minutes of class. If people want to share like opening it up, like what do they feel, think, if they want, something that stuck with them from this mimer. I don't know.
Okay, go ahead. Good.
Okay. First of all, Rachel, I don't know if it's Rachel, you're not alone. I think we're supposed to be struggling with this, and I'm certainly still struggling. I'll probably be struggling with this ad olam, but that's, I think the point is for us to, it's raised our awareness of something that if we struggle with it, I feel we'll get something out of it. Like the struggle is a good thing still, in my opinion. But I like the concept of nourishing the soul and how he made it physical and this gentle, I've never really been introduced to this heartfelt, gentle side of learning, feeding emunah, and that translating into a stronger bitachon, and that it's a process that is emotional and soulful. So I really, this is new for me, this approach, this Hasidus approach, and it's very warm, and I think it's a great concept. It's complicated, but it's a beautiful thing to be introduced to, and that we can work on nourishing it. It's not just supposed to be bam.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Hasidus.
What?
I say that's the beauty of Hasidus. It's warm, it's nourishing, and it gets us to the point that we need to get to. But yeah, it awakens the heart, the mind, and the heart.
Yeah. Anybody else want to share?
Well,
something?
I was just going to say, I think for me, the most difficult thing is I've already become one with a different paradigm of thinking. And I have to disengage every time I actually engage with a different paradigm. Because my whole life I was seeped in I don't want to label anything, but the Western civilization paradigm. I'm a secular Jew. I knew I was Jewish, but I was a secular Jew. But I really lived in the Western civilization. And to change, to understand all this, I have to myself, because I already became something. In other words, everyone connects to something deeply like that, and they become it. And change is unconnecting and becoming something else. It's,
You're reconnecting right now. You're reconnecting to your inner essence.
Right. But it's still hard, whatever my inner essence is.
Right.
It's been a long time covering it up.
Right.
So to speak. That makes sense?
Absolutely. You're doing good work.
Yes, you are. All ladies are doing good work. Carolyn, it never stops. The struggle never stops. Ladies, let me tell you this, it never stops. And you just ignore that piece of it, that's all. Just keep plowing on, that's all. That everybody real happy, I can see that.
Well, also,
go ahead, Debbie, go ahead.
Also, Malka, we can look at the struggle as being tailor-made for each one of us. So like we're getting a special something from Hashem, and it's helping us grow.
Yes. Yes, it's a very personal connection. It is a very personal connection, and our struggles are very, very personal. Absolutely. But the actual struggle never stops. Never stops.
It's going to stop when Mashiach comes.
Oh, thank God, Sarah. Enough. Yes.
So it's something to look forward to for a lot of reasons.
I never thought I'd say this, but I'm looking forward to Pesach because the whole concept of the food of faith, the matzah eating the food of faith, the narrowing of the neck, that's between the head and the heart. It's become a lot more concrete in my mind. The image has become much more concrete. And so when I eat that matzah on Pesach, that I'm really gonna be concentrating on this mimer actually, and just seeing if I can dig up a little more das from that.
Malka, that's a big accomplishment.
Well, yeah, considering Pesach. Oh.
This mimer also.
Go ahead, Debbie. Sorry.
It also made me more mindful of seeing the holiness, the godliness in our surroundings, and in a conscious way, like actively looking. It really, really, I connected to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyone else?
It always amazes me when I learn, and no matter how far you go back with the Rabbeim and Hasidus, it's all so relevant today. Imagine, they went in horse and carriage and all different kind of, different things, and here we are today, and it's as relevant, today as it was way back then. It's absolutely amazing.
Right. There's always been struggles and people trying to understand and prevail and find the godliness and find their own souls. And yeah. Anyone else want to share anything about the mimer? Or what it brought up for them? Okay, so I guess I'm going to stop the recording and